it's the hardest thing to see the child and not the monster, right? To see beyond that suit of armor that they have, beyond the monster, behind the mask, to understand what it is that put them down that road. But once you understand that they weren't born that way, right? That's not really who they are. It's who they became, and it's who they are now, but it's not who they were, right? And if you can understand that it's something that you learn to do instead of being born with, then you also can understand it's something you can unlearn and get back on the right track with the right resources and with the right accountability.
Well, hi there, and welcome to a SEAT With Me podcast. My name is Solène, and I am your host. And today, I have a beautiful conversation coming your way. I am sitting down with Christian Picciolini. And Christian Picciolini is an award-winning television producer, a public speaker, an author, anti-racism advocate, and a former extremist. At just 14 years old, Christian joined a white supremacist movement, a skinhead group. And for the next 8 years of his life, he was deeply involved and entrenched in a white supremacist group, so much so that he became one of their leader. He flew to Germany, to Weimar, to preach his ideology. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to understand, how does one join such a group? How do you believe such an ideology? And how do you get out? What can we do to get you out? And what do you do when you get out of such ideology? And these are the questions that I was lucky enough to ask him face to face. I talked to him about one of his books, White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement, and how I got out. And I truly urge every single person, regardless of where you place yourself on the spectrum, to read the book, because it is truly enlightening. I mean, trigger warning, it's really raw, but this is something that I really admire. The honesty with which he's retelling his story, his ideology, what he's done, what he was thinking, and how he got out of the group. I'm truly grateful that he accepted to sit down with me, as it's a question that I always ask myself. How do you end up becoming a white supremacist or a Nazi or a racist? Well, he explains it all, and he leaves you with a lot of life lessons, not just in his book, but in our conversation. So I'm not going to talk any longer, because it is a true amazing conversation that I had with him. Again, Christian, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Go read the book, please. It is truly enlightening. And I hope you like it as much as I did. Please feel free to write me at aseatwithmepodcast@gmail.com. Tell me what you think. If you have any questions or thoughts on the episode, I'll be delighted to read you. And without further ado, please take a seat with Christian. Hello, Christian. Thank you so much for taking a seat with me. Thank you for taking the time. We're on different time zones, but thank you.
Thank you, Solène. It's really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, well, I'm actually really, really excited, because having a conversation about what we're going to talk about, it's something that has been on my mind for years, since the first time that I heard a former police officer who decided to leave the police force because of everything that he was seeing. And it was the first time that it clicked on my mind that, first of all, there's hatred this way, but some people are coming out of it. It's so much stronger, but it's a movement, and some people are getting out of it. And so it was, as soon as I started the podcast, it was the least one of the topic that I wanted to cover. And then I found you, and I was like, well, I think I found the perfect person to talk to. So I read your books, because I wanted to learn as much as I could about you. And oh my God, I mean, your book, I'm going to focus on White American Youth. It is really a necessary and important read. I've never heard someone talk so honestly about the before, during, and after coming in and out of a hatred of a white supremacist movement. Let's call it how it is. And yes, I'm really, what a journey. What a courageous journey.
Well, thank you so much for reading it and thank you for your honest opinion on it. It was very important to me when I was writing the book that I wrote it as honestly and genuinely as possible, even using the language that I would have used during that part of my life. So it was not sugar coated. I didn't feel it would be honest to use different thoughts or languages that I had back then, because I wanted it to be raw, so that people understood exactly my mindset at that time.
And I think it was necessary to write it exactly how you thought it and how you lived it, because we live in a world where we want to sugarcoat things and censor things, but we need to truly, if we want to understand and live in community with one another, we need to hear one another the way we think. And sometimes it can, like you were out there, you were really a real one, and it's so courageous for you to lay it on the page. So just to take the listeners back, you are in America, because I'm in Germany. So you are in America. You are Italian. You are Christian Picciolini. Am I saying it right?
Correct. Very good.
Nice. I practiced this one. I was like Picciolini with the hands.
Very good.
Yes. So, and you grew up in America. You did not grow up in a white supremacist household whatsoever, and around the age of 13, 14, you entered a white supremacist movement where you were, you were absorbed, you were in a white supremacist movement, and you ended up being kind of a leader in that movement. And I guess that my first question is, as a 13, 14-year-old, how does one enter or come in contact with a group like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Like you said, I wasn't raised as a white supremacist. My parents are Italian immigrants to the United States that came here in the mid 1960s, and oftentimes after they arrived, they were the victims of prejudice. So it wasn't really a foundation of my upbringing at all. It was quite the opposite, actually. My parents had friends and from all over the world and from different backgrounds and cultures, and I was exposed to that as a young person. But also because my parents are immigrants, it meant that they had to work extremely hard to make it in this country. So that meant that they were gone 7 days a week, 14 or 15 hours a day, working hard at their small business to try and make a living for the family. So I didn't see them very much growing up. And unfortunately, that led to me feeling somewhat abandoned by my parents, even though I was surrounded by a lot of love. I always asked myself, as a young person, why aren't my parents here for me? And I wasn't mature enough to ask them those questions at that time. So those feelings turned into feelings of abandonment and low self-esteem. And I was, because I was somewhat excluded as a young person, even from, groups of friends and things like that. I was bullied because of that, and I started to really resent being that isolated young person. So one day in 1987, when I was just 14 years old, I was standing in an alley or a back street, and I was smoking a joint. And a man came up to me. He had a shaved head, and he was wearing, Doc Marten boots. And he pulled a joint from my mouth, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." Now, of course, at 14 years old, I didn't know what a communist was. I didn't know if I'd met a Jewish person.
Big words.
Really know what the word docile meant. But it was as if it was the first time that someone had paid attention to me. This man was 27 years old at the time. I was only 14, and it was 1987, so I didn't know what a skinhead was. In fact, nobody in America really knew what a skinhead was. But it turns out that this man who was recruiting me into the white supremacist movement that day was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader. And that movement had started essentially on the south side of Chicago, where I grew up and where I lived. So I didn't know I was being recruited at the time. To me, it felt just like somebody was trying to befriend me, and somebody who, felt really isolated and unpopular and powerless. It was really important to me for me to make friends. So when he drew me in just kind of under the offer of friendship, because I didn't understand the politics or even what he was saying, I jumped at that opportunity. And suddenly I went from this powerless 14-year-old kid to a 14-year-old that, felt some sort of power and agency and had friends and was surrounded by other people and girls and drinking, and suddenly it was fun. So, at first, for the first couple of years, I didn't really embraced the politics of it. I mimicked it. I said the things that they said, and I dressed the way that they dressed to fit in, but I didn't really understand it. And it wasn't until I was about 16 years old that I really started to absorb the politics of it all and really start to understand what I was embracing. And at that point, I participated in things like street violence and vandalism and even recruitment of my own, where I would go out and recruit other people. And eventually, when that original group that recruited me, after a couple of years, several of them had gone to prison. Some of them had run away from law enforcement and moved to other states. And some of them were just kind of in hiding. It left me as kind of the last person standing. So eventually I took over leadership of this very important, very infamous organization that was America's first white power or neo-Nazi skinhead group.
Yeah, and I think the origin of your story, the moment that you get recruited, basically, it is scary but also so relatable, because we see a young boy who just wants to matter, and you say it perfectly, right? You say, I wanted to matter. The need to live for a greater purpose came sharply into focus, and it's the whole movement at first is a promise of paradise, and it's something that we can be very judgmental when we see these people in those groups, because you're like, how dare you, being filled with hatred, etc. It's so easy to judge and to blame people in those groups. But when we hear you talk about what you were searching for at that age, well, we can all kind of relate. At 14 years old, we want to matter, we want friends, we want to be seen. Granted, we don't find it in the same place, but it's the same seed, right? It's the seed of wanted community, wanted purpose, and they gave you a sense of community, a sense of purpose. And like you said, at first you didn't believe it. You didn't believe the politics. You did not. I remember saying you were listening to the music, but the lyrics, you did not believe them, or you were not even listening to them.
Register with me. I didn't understand even what they were talking about. They were talking about unemployment and immigration and being pushed out. And at 14 years old, I'd never even had a job. My parents were immigrants, so I didn't really understand it. But you're exactly right, Celine. It's really, what I've come to learn over many, many years now, almost 30 years of being out of that movement, and the last 15 years of really helping people disengage, which is what I do now. I help people disengage from that movement. It's very common that this is a search for identity, community, and purpose. And that's something that we all seek as human beings. It's not, just a 14-year-old kid. It's adults who have retired or who've gone through a divorce. They're searching for this sense of identity, community, and purpose throughout our lives. And since we all do that, and not all of us become extremists or white supremacists, there's also something else. And for me, what I've figured out is something that I call potholes. In our life's journey, we encounter potholes. And I don't know if in Berlin you have potholes. I know you do, because I've been there.
Yeah, I know. We're going to talk about your little journey here on my side of the pond.
There's those holes in the ground when you're driving that, make you steer around them. And potholes in our journey can be trauma, abuse, things like that. For me, it was abandonment and low self-esteem. And those potholes detour us to the fringes as we're searching for identity, community, and purpose. And when we're on the fringes, there are people there waiting for us, whether it's a young person joining a gang or drug culture or a white supremacist group, or even, positive things. There are people there who are willing to offer us a sense of identity, community, and purpose. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. And in my situation, it was a very toxic sense of identity, community, and purpose that I found. So it's a very relatable thing, as you said, because it's something that really all of us go through. But at some point, I accepted who I was, and I was responsible for my actions. So while we can feel, guilty or sorry or shame for people who go through that and understand why they go through it, we also have to hold people accountable for their actions. And at one point, I became accountable for my actions. I did know what I was doing. But it's really important to understand where people came from and how they got there, to understand how to kind of pull them back.
Absolutely. And I think that's what your book does so beautifully. It really gave me, and I talk about it with friends, it really gave me like a slap in life lesson in humanity, because we truly need to go to the biggest common denominator. Is that how you call it in math?
Yeah.
Go to the roots and the seed and realize that honestly, I mean, yes, it's not the best feeling to relate to Nazis and extremists, but there were a lot of time where I relate to your story and your search for identity, for purpose, and having a little power. Yes, of course, holding you accountable. I completely agree, no doubt. But we still need to relate to one another. And you say it so beautiful when you talk about, I'm probably going to mispronounce their names, but the adult, I mean, the 27-year-olds, right? You aspired to be them because you saw the effect that they had on people. It's like he was like an idol almost to you, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that, again, we can all relate to. Now, unfortunately, they stirred you towards hatred, and that's where you ended up. But I feel like it's really, really important to understand that there is a common seed, and there is no point into trying to I don't know, to separate ourselves, because we ended up becoming who we hate. I mean, that's my belief, right? But when it comes to the belief, because at first you were just listening and just consuming, I guess what are the beliefs really? I guess it's just hatred. But for someone on the other side, it's like, what do you guys truly believe? What's the belief? Like, what is the message?
Yeah, I mean, so I could tell you what the belief was in that movement, but I could tell you what it really was for me,
Yeah.
for most people. And in that movement, the way that they preach is superiority over other races, whether, it's black races or Jewish or, Asian. They preach that white people are superior. And of course, we know throughout history that that's just not true. But in that bubble, to people who are vulnerable to that message, it can seem true, especially if they don't have exposure to anybody else. And, at 14 years old, I didn't have any exposure to anybody who wasn't like me. So it eventually resonated with me. And the way that they make people afraid and willing to join these movements is they tell you that whiteness or that race that you belong to is being taken away, is being destroyed by the other races. And it's something that today they call the replacement theory. We hear that, from movements in France and America. And really, it's the number one conspiracy theory that white supremacists use, is that other races will eventually, through birth rates and things like that, overtake the white race and wipe the white race out. And of course, it's just not true. And that's really the driving force, that everybody else is taking something away from you. It's about the other. The other is always blamed for taking jobs, for controlling, finance systems, for controlling messaging on the media. And that, they make people afraid so much that they want to join something that is really completely against, who we are as human beings, because we need each other as human beings. Now, I'll tell you what the trick was. Trick in understanding this is it's really never inside of us. It's really never about hating anybody else. It's about hating ourselves and projecting that outward. I hated myself. I didn't hate anybody else. I thought I hated other people, but really what it was is I hated myself. And I was willing to hurt other people so much because I hated myself. And I would say that that's true for anybody who hates anybody else, because, we hate people we don't even know, right? We hate these mysterious people that we've never met, that live, in other countries or across town. And we blame them for the things that happen to us, when oftentimes it's really we are the ones responsible.
You hate an idea, you hate a concept, you don't hate a person.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
hate,
So how is that possible? So really, I think what it is all about, and I've come to learn this over many years of doing this work and being involved, is it's really self-hatred being projected out to other people.
Yes, and I love that you're saying this, because it is my true belief. Because as a Black person, when I hear the racist, the Nazi, etc., talk about their hatred for Black people, I'm like, you're not talking to me. It's not me nor my mom. The Black person, the Black people that they're talking about or that they're talking to, it's not me. But that takes a while to reach that conclusion, even in my own process, right?
Sure.
But you realize that it's never about anyone outside of you. It always goes back to you. But you say that none of it is true. So my question is, because you spend over, like 5 years, 4 or 5 years, even a
Eight
little
years
more.
I was
Oh,
I
eight
was eight
years
years
total.
involved in the
Oh,
movement.
8 years
Yes.
total. If this is not true, what were they using in reality? I mean, what were they using to make you believe something that is factually untrue? What was, sorry, reinforcing the beliefs of you and the groups, and how do you, how do you lie so much?
Well, we lived in a bubble, right? We excluded ourselves from society,
Mm,
and we created the information. We've heard of conspiracy theories, we've heard of fake news and all these things. Well, within that movement, they made the facts, right? So once you exclude yourself from the rest of the world, the facts from the rest of the world are false,
mm,
and the facts that you're being fed by the movement are true. So the movement can create whatever facts they want. They can say that, blacks are murdering whites at crazy numbers. They can say that people from Latin America are coming and taking our jobs. They can say that Jews control the media and the finance systems. But that's only true within the bubble of where you're told. If you
mm,
step outside of that bubble into the real world, of course, you realize it's not true. I mean, just factually, it's just not true. So, and it's the same if you're part of a cult. It's the same if you're part of a gang. It's the same if, you're part of any kind of very tight circle. The information you're being fed from the people at the top is only true within your bubble. It's not true in the real world. So that's how it was reinforced, is we relied on information that was manufactured within that bubble that I lived in at that time. And to be a part of that bubble, to belong, to have that sense of identity, community, and purpose, and the reward that came from
mm.
it, I had to give up everything on the outside world. I had to give up my family. I had to give up, any friends that I may have had. I had to give up, the news that we get our information from, and I had to trade all that for the family on the inside, the news on the inside, the reward of identity, community, and purpose on the inside, and not have any access to the truth.
And
So
did you think that all those people, your family, did you think that they were wrong, that you had the truth and they didn't have the truth? And did you resent it? Did you resent them? Did you have disdain? Did you feel, oh my God, you guys are so freaking stupid and gullible? Like, what became your relationship to them after you
yeah,
found
that's
the
exactly
truth,
it.
quote unquote?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, once I was brainwashed and once I had accepted the ideology of the movement, I thought everybody who didn't believe it was weak and stupid
Mm,
and too afraid to see the truth, too afraid to do what was right. And I resented them for that. Now, of course, there were always moments in the 8 years, and especially at the beginning and at the end, there were moments in the
yeah,
8 years where I questioned what I believed. I
yeah.
questioned the ideas that the movement gave me because, there's just some things that don't feel right.
The
You're
reality
built
is you're still living in the real world, so the reality is
right.
always in front of you.
And I had a foundation, up until 14 years old where I was taught certain things, right? So
Yeah,
there were definitely moments, and I would say almost daily, I had moments of doubt about the
yeah.
movement. However, it's not a safe place to voice those doubts.
You
Once
say
you're part
so.
of this
Yeah.
movement, yeah, you don't go to other skinheads and say, "Hey, I'm starting to wonder about what we." It's just not a safe place to do that. So
Mm,
you keep it inside, and also if you question it, you lose your power in that movement. They see you as a traitor. They push you out, and I didn't have anything to go back to. So what you eventually do is you just stuff those doubts deeper inside and you do more for the movement to prove yourself. So even though I was doubting myself, I was still doing more. I was pushing harder for those ideas in the movement while the doubts were increasing in me because I was
mm,
afraid of being found out that I was having doubts. And then certainly the last couple of years that I was in the movement, I had nothing but doubts, but I just wasn't brave enough to leave because leaving meant that I had to leave everything that I knew at that point. I was 22 years old. All my friends were in the movement. movement. My job was in the movement. I was in a band, singing racist music. That was my livelihood. I had a record store that was selling racist music. Everything about me was tied into that movement. So leaving meant leaving everything behind. And the outside world was a very scary place for me because I didn't have any friends there anymore. And there wasn't anybody like me now who was willing to help people disengage. There wasn't a former, extremist or a former neo-Nazi who would come out and said, hey, they're wrong and there's a better life outside of this movement. So it wasn't an option to do that until everything, of course, got so bad that I had no choice.
You had to. And I guess there was no credible person because like you went through it. You were one of the, and because when I hear you, talk, and when I guess I'm part of the woke police. It's so easy for us to treat the other as the ignorant. To be honest, I see it when we talk about people on the right and far right, etc., to make fun of their beliefs, etc., etc. It's so easy for us to just take that route and say, oh, just read a good book. Like, it's so fucking dumb and stupid to believe these things, but we don't realize that we're just not in the same reality. And I guess that the movement made it even easier for them to brainwash you because they blamed the media and they made you lose faith in the media, in school, in your teachers, in your parents. So they create, like you say, they create this bubble where they feed you the information and they are right. Because of course I then went out and researched and tried to read as much as I could. People truly believe the lies that this movement are selling, are saying for the, and you say it's the allure of power. It's the allure of power. I think you say the allure of power, identity, and purpose. Just for that, in the name of that, people are believing this. And what was surprising to me is that you were still faced, like you say, with evidence of the truth. You had Black teammates, friends. You would see that your parents were working really hard. But still, you chose the lies, even repeatedly being faced. Even the people that you were fighting, you were faced with the truth, but you still believed the lies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, but those things also chipped away little by little at me eventually changing. So while at that moment I didn't accept it, my Black teammates on my football team or, the people in my neighborhood who treated me with respect, even though I didn't treat them with respect, those moments accumulated over time and they eventually helped to chip away. So it's not useless to do that. It's not useless to be empathetic towards people who are bad because truly, and I tell people all the time to do this, is if we want to change people, it's not through debate. It's not through punching them in the nose, even though it feels really good to do that. It is really about showing empathy to the people who least deserve it, because oftentimes they're the ones who need it the most. And it's a very powerful tool. It's not something that can be scaled, but it's something that we can do one-on-one with people. And eventually they will, it's hard to deny once you feel something, the humanity in people. It's easy to when you hear about it, to dismiss it. But if you feel it, it's very difficult to do. And I will tell you, as somebody who has been on both sides, what they believe in is fucking stupid, right? It is literally based on lies.
Yeah.
It is literally based on lies. Yeah. So, when if you hear somebody who says, I'm better than you because, I'm white and you're Black, or I'm white and you're an immigrant, I mean, that's pretty stupid, right? Like we all know that, that person is certainly, what they believe in is not absolute. And that person, has many, many more smarter people, more successful people, more loving people who are different than them, probably than they even know in their own lives, right? So, what they believe in is pretty stupid.
But what is interesting is that how you choose. Sorry,
it doesn't help to tell them that doesn't change their mind. You have to do it through other ways.
That's the thing. It's not about what changed your mind, and we're going to talk about that later. It's not statistics. It's not articles. It's not think pieces. What changed your life is actually empathy, conversation, and just openness and forgiveness, right? But I was really interested about you truly have a real love for violence. And it's something that I really try to understood because, when you talk about it, it became pleasurable. And I really was trying to find something that I love and find the love in violent. So can you talk to us about kind of your daily life when you were into it, when you were more towards when Clark was in prison and you were more deep inside, you were seeing more and more as a leader in the movement. But it was a lot of fighting, a lot of just free fighting.
Yeah, I think it definitely felt that way when I was involved in it for reasons of me being rewarded by it. Right, when I fought people on the street, I got more power internally. People saw me as stronger. Right, I'd gone from this kind of weak 14-year-old to suddenly this strong 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old. Of course, it wasn't true power. It was, it was being a bully, and it provided a sense of control in my life where I felt out of control in most other circumstances. Of course, it wasn't true control. It was, overpowering other people. I would say in the end, it wasn't a true love of violence. It was, I would say, probably like most people can relate to this in understanding how drug addiction works. When I did the drug, when I did the violence, it made me feel good. It made me feel powerful. But it was also killing me, right? And I think people who are addicted to substances and drugs are very aware that it is killing them, but they still do it because for a moment it makes them feel good. Now that goodness that they feel is not true goodness. It's the drug lying to them, right? It's something in their body changing for an instant, but it's not, it's not a true change. It's not a true goodness. So I think, violence for me was a lot like a drug where when I did it for a moment, it made me feel good. And then afterwards I felt terrible about it. And in fact, it was violence, an act of violence for me that really changed me. And it was the last time I committed an act of violence, and it was against a young black man who I had seen in a restaurant one night after drinking with my friends. He was in a restaurant, and me and my friends walked in, and I was trying to intimidate him and to try to scare him to leave. And what happened was, me and my friends ended up chasing this group of young black men who were about the same age as us. I think we were 17 or 18 years old at the time. And we chased them out of the restaurant. And we caught one of them and we beat him very severely. And it was that moment, and I still can't explain it. Some scientist or therapist or psychologist maybe can explain this to me. But in the moment that I was hurting this man, as I was kicking him when he was on the ground, our eyes connected. And I suddenly felt overwhelming empathy for this individual, as though he was my brother, as though he was somebody, in my own family, somebody that I cared about, my son, maybe even. And I don't know what it was, because up until that moment, I had no respect for this person. I didn't know this person. But in that moment, as I was hurting him, I suddenly had this overwhelming feeling of compassion and empathy for him. And I stopped.
How old was he approximately?
How old was he? He was about the same age as me, maybe 17 or 18 years old at the time. And I connected with him. Maybe I saw myself in him. I don't know what it was. I still can't explain it. But it was that moment where I realized, I felt immediately guilt and shame that I cannot explain. That was so powerful that it was confusing to me. At the time. And that really forced me to change the way I thought about things. Why did I do that? How could I hurt this person? Why was I hurting this person? What if, somebody that I know was hurt that way? And it forced me to start thinking about things in a different way and really feeling it. And that was really the last time I was involved in an act of violence. And literally, from all the other times where it made me feel good or high, when I was committing violence, this one made me feel sick to my stomach, like literally sick to my stomach, and it put me down a path of really trying to be more self-aware and self-understanding of what I was involved in, and it sent me down a path of really truly questioning what I was involved in.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And it's one of the the many turning points, because I was really moved when I was reading about your turning points, because there were many, right? Moments where kind of cracks began showing in your beliefs, when your mind starting to shift away from hatred a little bit. It was slow, but still you could see that it was happening. You were talking to us about your internal dialogue. And so you did mention that that incident, that violent act around that black boy that you bit, and you talk about, like you said, locking eyes with him and seeing, what I think was yourself. Do you remember because there were many turning points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what emotions or thoughts were you angry at yourself? Were you sad? Were you disappointed? Were you scared during when this started to show more and more during those turning points?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started with confusion because I couldn't explain what I was feeling. It suddenly was very different than what I had felt, before then. It was anger that I couldn't control myself. It was a lot of shame. I felt shame for what I was involved in and guilt. And then it was fear. I was afraid because suddenly I realized I was involved in something that I couldn't get out of, right? Easily, anyway. There really was no getting out. There was nobody before me who had left that I was aware of that had escaped, in one piece. It was, if you left, you were a traitor, and not only a traitor, but a race traitor, which is, in that movement, the worst possible thing that you can be. They have enemies, and then they have enemies from within who leave, and they're real enemies.
And when you left, you were treated as a race traitor anyway. I mean, you had comments about that, so it was a real fear.
Yeah, once I finally left in 1996, and for several years after that, and even for decades after that, I received death threats about leaving. I was called a traitor and a race traitor. My family was threatened. It was not a great time, but I also felt very, self-assured in why I had left. I knew because now I had experienced both sides after leaving, that I knew that leaving was the right thing to do, and that it would have been even more dangerous for me to stay. So it was really a no-brainer for me to leave, although it took me a couple of years after I left in 96, it took me a couple of years to really understand who I was and to come to terms with the fact that I needed to stop running from who I was and accept it and take responsibility for it. So I left in 96, and it wasn't until 1999, early 2000, when I really started to understand that it wasn't just about leaving. It wasn't just about apologizing for what I had done. I had to take responsibility for what I had done, and I had to work for the rest of my life to repair the harm that I had caused. And I really believe that accepting that responsibility and taking action on it is what made me who I am today. Because I think a lot of people make mistakes and either say nothing about it and move on, or they apologize and move on. But saying you're sorry isn't enough, in my opinion. You have to do the work. I've been committed to that work since, for the last 25 years.
Yes, because your purpose at 14, well, maybe not 14, between 16 and early 20s, your purpose was literally to save the white race, quote unquote. Like, it was kind of part of what they were telling you to do. And you had to undo all of that. And that's why I say, I think that it is a must read, because it's so out of my... So I don't know. It's so out of my world, my universe, to think in that way. Because of course, I mean, we hear that they are very present in the world, but to really hear someone talk about what is going on during, and the message, and the because it's truly a mission. It's young boys on a mission trying to save white race, even though it has never been endangered, but they truly believe that they are saving people, and that's why they go out. But my question is, what is the ideal world? Because I understand we want to save us. Okay, great. The white race. And we go out and we hurt. What are we fighting for? What are you guys, what is... You know what I mean? What's the after? We fight everyone. I beat everyone in the street. Okay, but what is the world after? The day after?
So, their mission statement is something that they call the 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. That's 14 words. That is their mission statement for the movement. The goal was to, it depends on who they're talking to, on what they really believe, right? If
yes,
they're talking
I want the real deal. Yeah.
Here's the real truth: is they really want to eliminate everybody else that's not like them. They'll tell you that, they want to be separatists. They'll say, we just want our own homeland. We just want our own people to have a place where they can be safe. What they really want is to eliminate people who are black, people who are Jewish, people who are from, Latin countries, people who are, disabled, people who are dealing with mental health challenges. They want to create this perfect world where the perfect white specimen exists. And really what it boils down to is a world full of white men, right? Because they don't really think highly of women either, white women. Even though they accept them and they, to recruit them, they use them as propagandists. They tell them that they're, the saviors of the white race because they're birthing the future of the white race. They really have a low opinion of women. So ultimately, what they want is the destruction of everything so that they can have a place to be powerful. But what happens when it's just a place full of white men? Right? They're going to destroy each other in theory.
Yeah.
Not that that would ever happen, that they would create that place. But even in their own minds, if they got exactly what they wanted, what could they accomplish with, a small village of white men and nobody else existing in the world, right? So, they want to eliminate gay people. They want to eliminate everything. So what the term for that is accelerationism. They are accelerationists, meaning they want to accelerate the demise of civilization so that everything burns and they could then build a new civilization based on their ideals of these white supremacist ideals.
What a plan.
Is a ridiculous, stupid idea based on, a bunch of fear and self-loathing and, really.
But isn't it exhausting to be afraid all the time? Were you not exhausted to be?
It is exhausting to hate. That was one thing that I can tell you. It was very exhausting.
Feels exhausting.
Yeah.
Because
especially
I could read your.
I mean, you're always chasing, falsehoods. So
yes,
you never stop running.
When you were talking to me about talking to me in your book, it does feel like you're, sharing your story around a coffee. I was like, oh my God, another fight, another song, I'm like, just relax, relax.
Chill out.
Yeah, just chill out. It's okay. Everything, I promise that everything, if you don't fight today, Christian, it's gonna be okay. It sounds so really exhausting, but again, with the urgency of we need a little village with just us and us. Well, I'm gonna take my weapon and fight. But I had a question because you started doubting, right? And your parents were. At this point, you had no to little relationship with them. Why didn't you share your doubt with them, though, at some point? They would be happy.
They were, yeah. Once they figured out what I was involved in, my parents kind of dropped everything and tried to get me out. They tried to help me, but I think unfortunately by that point I was so resentful of them and angry at them for feeling abandoned that a lot of what I was doing was meant to hurt them. Of course I pushed them away and they never gave up on me. And when I was ready to leave, they were there for me. But I think I was also ashamed to go back to them because, I had to admit I was wrong. And at first when I left, I wasn't brave enough to admit I was wrong. I was brave enough to move on from the movement, but I wasn't brave enough to admit that I had been wrong and done bad things and that I needed to do some work to earn trust again from people. And it took me a couple of years to do that before I started to do that. So I think, I was still angry. I was still resentful of my parents while I was in the movement. And it wasn't until I knew I needed to leave that I really went to them and I said, listen, I need your help. I didn't have a job. My wife had left me, I was in a really, really bad place. So I needed their help and I asked for it at that point. And of course they gave it to me and I'm grateful for that.
Yes, because we did mention that you did not grow up in a white supremacist household. They went through it. They saw their son transformed in front of their eyes and transformed into someone that is so filled with hatred, and they had to pull up with your violence sometimes towards them or towards the world. And I guess that it was not easy for them and like you said, they did everything. They tried to keep you in in high school, and they try to keep you socialized. So that was really interesting to hear. But in the midst of all that, you did become a dad. You mentioned your wife. You did become a dad, which is okay, interesting that you also have time. I mean, you also had time, quote unquote, to be a father. So you became a dad at first at 19. Your
19.
first son was born. What happened? Like, how white supremacist dad we're fighting, but we have a wife that we love so much.
This is really interesting. So, at 18 years old, I met a girl and I fell in love, and she was not a part of the movement. In fact, she was the opposite. She was this very kind of progressive, liberal, punk rock girl who thought everything I believed in was stupid. And at first she didn't want anything to do with me, but I somehow pursued her and we managed to fall in love. And I think she saw something inside of me that, I wasn't willing to show the outside world, because I think the real me was very kind of, soft and compassionate, and the armor that I was wearing was very scary. And we fell in love and got married at 18. And at 19, we had our first son. And at 21, we had our second son. And I never brought the movement home. I never pushed it on my wife or my children. I kept it separate. I lived two lives at that point. My wife knew what I was involved in, and she didn't agree with it. And she always tried to get me to stop. But I was also very good at separating the two, keeping my family, wholesome, and being very ugly outside of my family. And of course, eventually I prioritized the movement over my family, so she left me after 4 years of being married. But I also was very committed as a father. I was also committed as a husband while I was married, but I still had this movement that I couldn't let go of, because it had been everything for me since I was 14. When we got divorced, I was still very committed to being a father, and I credit that as being one of the really major things that helped me find my way out of the movement, because I loved my children. I still love my children. They're now 30 and 32 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to think that, but I had to challenge myself, because I didn't know if I wanted to be this hate monger or a father. I didn't know if my community was, the one I had surrounded myself with, or the one I'd given life to. And my purpose was had to be balanced. I didn't know if it was to burn the earth, or to create an earth that was safe for my children. And eventually my children won out, and I realized that, what I wanted to do was be a good dad, set a good example for my children. And I think I even knew that when I was in the movement, because I never brought the movement home. I never modeled it at home for them. So I think, somehow inside of myself, I knew that that's who I didn't want my children to be like me. So
you didn't want to create, you were not creating that world for them. It was interesting, because when you said you had a son, I was like, well, I guess he's raising the next him. But actually, no, you were really adamant about not bringing this home, not bringing your first son and then your second, but your son in, not even trying to convert your wife. And I love a little quote. You said, a movement dominated by insecure men, where outwardly would praise white women as goddesses and the progenitors of our great warrior breed. But the truth was that in close quarters, the women were often treated worse than the people we claim to hate. Most believed that women's sole purpose was to pop out Aryan babies and fetch cold beer. But you did not believe that. There was still a crack in your belief that at that moment, because even your wife and your kid, you truly separated them from. And did you?
There were a lot of things that, when I was in it, I participated in, but in all honesty, in my own life, I didn't mimic, because I respected my wife. She was a strong, smart woman, and I couldn't treat her like some of the other men treated their wives and girlfriends.
What is the percentage of people like that in the movement? What do you think? How many other men you think were like you, where we're in it and we mimic the behavior, but
It's hard to say, because nobody's really, most people probably aren't themselves. When you get a bunch of guys together, they tend to act, like who they want people to think they are, instead of who they really are. So it's hard to say, but I would say it's probably a pretty significant percentage of people who, deep down inside probably could have been pretty good people.
Yeah.
But, I only saw the bad side of that, right? Like we weren't vulnerable with each other. I didn't share my vulnerability and how I really felt with people in the movement. And they also didn't share that with me because, again, it wasn't a safe place to do
Yeah.
that. But, I also saw a lot of really, really awful things happen. These women were abused by their boyfriends and husbands.
Yeah.
They were, just sexually, physically abused. And these were men that they were conditioned to trust. So, I
Their
would say
savior.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say that a lot of the men involved, probably really were, doing bad things on a regular basis. And, there were probably some that were like me who, maybe said one thing but did another.
Yeah. And when it comes to, if we want to understand, because like you said, you've experienced the mindset of hatred and hate intimately, both from within the group, but also now as someone who's, like you say, you're helping people out, right? What is hate and hatred so addictive and so appealing to young people, particularly vulnerable young people? Why is it so appealing and addictive?
I think that the one common denominator with, extremist movements and hate movements in particular is that they feed on uncertainty in people. And I think a lot of young men are very uncertain. I think a lot of people just in general in today's society, because of everything happening in the world, are very uncertain. And I think that's also why we're seeing extremism flourish all over the world, why we're seeing, autocratic, dictator types being elected, and not just in my country, but in Europe and in South America
Germany.
and in Eastern Europe, it seems to be a very big trend. And I think that that's because there's so much uncertainty, economic uncertainty, educational uncertainty, health uncertainty in the world right now, that a lot of people are starting to gravitate to these very absolute ideological movements. It's very black and white. There is no gray area in between. And I think because uncertainty is flourishing right now, people are craving answers. And these groups are very good at providing answers, although not true answers in most cases. They do provide very concrete answers for what they believe in. And they also place the blame on other people for the problems that people are facing. A lot of people are facing problems right now, economic problems, job problems. And these groups very clearly place the blame on somebody else versus themselves or versus the people themselves. So I think that that's why we're seeing this now. But I want to be clear. This isn't just about young men. It's about, in my country on January 6th, when there was an attack on the Capitol building, there were no 14-year-olds there. These were 50, 60, 70-year-old men who were attacking, our government. And it's also because at that age, you are also searching for a sense of identity, community, and purpose, and have a whole lifetime of potholes, whether it's divorce or health issues or job loss. Now people have been divorced and they need to create a new sense of identity, community, and purpose, or they've left, they've been fired from their job or left their job and have to start over, or they've retired, or, I think this is something that plagues us as human beings at any age, but especially when we're young, when we're starting to develop those ideas. But we shouldn't forget that, adults are the ones who run this world. It's not young people, and they're the ones who set the example for young people. And if young people don't have the opportunities to do better and aren't empowered, and I think as adults we do a disservice to young people. We need to empower young people because they're smart, they're ambitious, and they want to accomplish things. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that they're able to accomplish are only the ones that are presented to them by people with kind of predatory or toxic ideas. So we need to do a better job as leaders, as parents, as adults, as teachers of really providing better avenues for young people. Because at 14 years old, had somebody else come to me in that alley instead of a skinhead, if it was a football coach or a band or a group of skaters or a ballerina troupe, I could have been the greatest of any of those probably, but I didn't have that opportunity. It never happened, and instead I became a very good skinhead.
And I thought that exactly. I thought to myself, that moment in the hallway it could have been anyone because he just gave you a sense of being cared for because he told you not to do drugs. He gave you guidance. He gave you something
Yeah.
to look up, something to wake up for. He gave you purpose and power. And that could have come, like you said, from everyone. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And now that you are, you're actively helping people exiting extremist group, what do you think is the most, I don't know, effective first step into reaching out to someone who is already entrenched? Because I feel like now it's with social media, it's so much faster to get entrenched into hatred or into extremism, extreme
Yeah.
left or extreme right. It's just easy to get entrenched into extremism now and to create that bubble with the algorithm, etc., etc. But you, because you help people coming out of it, what do you think is the most effective first step if you want to reach
Well,
out?
I try and be that person that I wished would have came for me at 14 years old instead of the skinhead. So I try and be that person to offer opportunities other than the path that they're going down. I've helped. I've worked with over 800 people to disengage from hate groups, whether it be the person who's entrenched themselves asking for help, or a family member who's concerned about a loved one, or a friend who says, that their girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or coworker is involved in something bad and they're looking for advice. So I've had the opportunity to meet lots of people who are entrenched in this movement, not to mention the thousands of people that I met when I was involved in this movement. And I can tell you probably the hardest thing to do, but the first thing that needs to happen is there has to be a level of trust between me and that person. And the way I do that is by listening. They're used to people not listening to them or telling them that they're wrong.
Interesting.
But I listen to them, and I don't tolerate ideological debate. Like, I won't listen to their bullshit about what they believe in. I filter that noise out and I focus on the potholes.
Read between the lines.
Yeah. And if they say, oh, I believe
Interesting.
this, I say, well, tell me about your father. And I listen. Or I
Oof,
say,
you go there. Is it your
when was
mom
the
or your
first
dad?
time you tried? Or tell me about the first time you fell in love. Or, and I try to have conversations
Interesting.
with them where we can relate with each other, because I think anybody can relate to that, right? We've all been in love. We've all cried. We've all had a father or a mother or, an experience in our life. So I try to connect with them on those very relative issues that anybody can connect on. And it's easy. Once you establish that connection, a level of trust begins, because I also share my own experiences. And then I listen to what they say. And if we were to debate, we would go off track right away. If we can focus on the things that we can relate to, we will be able to have a conversation where maybe at some point we can go off track, but we can always come back to something we've connected on. And then what I do is, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not even a social worker. I am just somebody who's been there, who understands where they've been, and I understand how to get out. So what I do is I connect them with professionals, with therapists, with psychologists, because I do believe they have the tools to make people whole. That's what they do, just in their practice generally. And most of these people have trauma, they have abuse, they have, feelings of low self-esteem. They're all things that I think they need to speak to somebody about. And then eventually what I do to try and pull them out is I will introduce them, once they're ready, I will introduce them to the people they think that they hate, so that they can then feel how silly it is to hate that person without knowing them, and understand that they actually have much more in common with that person that they thought that they hated than they actually knew about. So it's a long process, as you can imagine. This is not an overnight change that people go through. And it's a very intense, you have to be committed to this process. And, that's what I've helped, hundreds of people disengage from hate through that process of connection, of giving empathy to the people that least deserve it, because that's certainly what changed me.
Yeah.
And then connecting them with things that pull them out of their potholes and put them on the right track for a positive sense of identity, community, and purpose. Because ultimately, you have to replace the bad sense of identity, community, and purpose with something positive. Otherwise, they can go sideways or backwards, and that's not good.
Because your journey, you have to believe in change. And I know that because of my politics and because of my views, I have to believe in change. I have to believe that people can change. But then it's just, one day I do and one day I don't. And I
It's
guess that it
hard.
must be, yes, I mean, you have to believe in change, but it must be beautiful to witness that change, right? Once
It
you
is.
see it.
Yeah, it is beautiful, but it is also probably the hardest thing to do. I mean, I really believe in holding people accountable for the bad things that they've done. I held
Yes.
myself accountable for them. I still do, and I really believe that that change without accountability is just privilege. It's like white privilege. Like you're not supposed to move on from that without
Mm,
really doing the work, right? So
yeah.
while it's the hardest thing to believe, it's the hardest thing to see the child and not the monster, right? To
Mm-hmm.
see beyond that suit of armor that they have, beyond the monster, behind the mask, to understand what it is that put them down that road. But once you do, once you understand that they weren't born that way, right? That's not really who they are. It's who they became and it's who they are now, but it's not who they were, right? And if you can understand that it's something that you learn to do instead of being born with, then you also can understand it's something you can unlearn and get back on the right track with the right resources and with the right accountability.
With the right people. And I talked about, because I was really looking forward to our chat, and I talked to my friend about that, and I had a spectrum of reaction. Some people were like, "Oh my god, that is so interesting, that is so wow," and some people were like, he's a former, like he's an XX, like, and it made me, it made me want to ask you, how do you handle criticism or skepticism when it comes to your transformation? Because it's easy to, when we hear that word, it feels like it's an identity that is forever and ever. When someone is a
Yeah.
white supremacist, that it seems like, and so when you say, I'm gonna talk to someone who used to be, who left the group, it's like, well, what, so how do you handle people who are maybe skeptical about your transformation?
Well, I think everybody's entitled to their opinion of me, but I also, through my actions, I don't ever tell anybody that they're wrong. If they think, hey, you can't change, that they're entitled to their opinion, and I don't fight that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I try to do is prove it through my actions, and for the last 25 years, have really believed
Yeah.
that I must do the work for me to gain that trust back, and I
Mm.
don't ever assume that I have that trust. When I went into after I left the movement and I started to understand what I needed to do, I went into the communities of people that I had hurt and I asked them for advice. I asked them for help. I didn't have the answers. I didn't pretend like I had the answers. And I was very fortunate to find people who were willing to take me under their wing and
Yes.
mentor me out. And I'm so grateful for that because it not only allowed me to understand who they were and to appreciate who they are, it also allowed me to be very humble and very reflective of how I needed to make good. Right. So now
Mm-hmm.
my goal is to make good happen wherever I go. I understand that there are people who may never understand that I've changed or I'm trying to change, and that's okay. I can't force that on anybody. But I'm also very fortunate to know many people who, appreciate what I've done to do
Yeah.
that change, and I'm there for everybody. I'm not only there for the people who accept me. I am still continuing to do the work for everybody, for humanity, and I know that that's my life's mission. It's not anything that I can ever tell myself I've done enough. Right?
Yeah,
It's just who
it's a
I am now.
lifelong journey. But I think by reading your book, there is no doubt that at least there is a pure and honest will to change and to learn, and that it comes from a true, honest place of. I mean, we're never finished product, but at least we feel that you were honestly doing the work back then of the skinhead, and now you're honestly doing the work. You're putting your all in every single thing that you do. And something that you say, a quote, that something in your book you say, now people I had once terrorized, because you just talked about being in community with the people that you formerly hate. Now people I had once terrorized were willing to knowingly put aside the evil I stood for. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? Why were they willing to do that?
That's a good question, and I think part of it is probably because of the way I approach them in a very humble way of not knowing the answers, of asking for forgiveness, but also being willing to do the work of forgiveness,
Mm.
and also because I think that they were very smart people that probably saw beyond the mask of who I had been for 8 years into, the very kind of insecure young person that I really was. And they were wise. They were, these were people who were wise beyond their years, and I give them, all the credit in the world for allowing me into their circles when they didn't have to. They certainly didn't have to. I had been somebody who, was a danger to them, somebody who had hurt people like them. And here they were, so compassionate and so empathetic that they were willing to say, okay, I will give you the opportunity to prove that you are not that person anymore. And they were brave, and I wasn't. And, they allowed me to learn how to be brave enough to admit I was wrong and to admit that I needed to do a lot of work to repair what I had broken.
What did your two sons had to say about that when they read the book? What did they come to you when they read the book? Did they read the book? Were they?
Yeah, so they were, by the time I wrote the book, they were, teenagers, young teenagers, but they were very good readers. They read a lot. And they were actually the first people that I allowed to read my book. Of course, after I talked to them.
Fun family dinner time.
No, not at dinner time, but it was, after talking to them for many years and after I left the movement, I was honest with them. They were the only people at first that I was honest with. I didn't want them to be like me. So while I was still doing work on myself, I was trying to teach them to be, inclusive and accepting of other people, and to be, curious about other cultures. And at a young age, we traveled the world. I've taken them to Africa. I've taken them, to Turkey and, to Europe and all these places to experience, to Haiti. I've taken them and to experience different cultures so that they wouldn't be like me. And then, when it came time to write the book and I wrote it, they were the first people I asked to read it because I wanted them to know everything about me, and I didn't want to hide anything from them because I didn't want them to be like me.
I think that's the best, to show your true self to your son, so they know. I mean, they know who you are, but also they know that exists as well. And I guess to also see the change, I think that's the most beautiful part, right? To see that this used to be dad, this is dad now. So that means, it teaches them about humanity and about change, teaches them that people can change and learn and become. So also we can really see the love that you have for your son, and it's really...
Thank you. I also didn't want them to find out, from anybody else but me. I didn't want them to get to an age where they suddenly found out all this information about dad and they weren't prepared for that. So it was really important to me. I've always had a very close relationship with both of my sons, and I'm fortunate that they're amazing young men who are see the world in a much, much different way than I did at their ages, and I'm grateful for that, because they are people that I, wish everybody could be. They're empathetic and compassionate people.
Do you remember them at 13, 14? What did you see in them that maybe did you see yourself? What kind of, when they were 13, 14, in which mindset were you?
Well, I would have been almost 30 at that point. Not quite 30, in my late 20s. And, they were teenagers too. They weren't perfect. They stayed out late when they weren't supposed to. They, got in trouble when they weren't supposed to.
Did you see red faster than any other parents, or were you on the other hand, you were like, I got this, I know?
No, I mean, I'm not perfect, right? Say I'm a perfect parent would be a lie. I think I learned to be a parent just like everybody else did, without a rule book. But I also think that it was hard for me to be that authoritarian parent because I knew what I had done as a young person. So to punish them for staying out late when I had done things much, much worse than they did would be kind of hypocritical, in my opinion. So, I'm not perfect. I was not a perfect parent. They were not perfect teenagers, but we were a very happy, very solid family that, I think, I would do it all over again if I had to with them as a parent, because I learned so much from them, maybe as much as they learned from me. Yeah, they're good people.
And I would like to end on the notion of forgiveness, because I think that it's kind of at the core of a lot of things, right? Forgiveness. I imagine that it is part of of any healing journey. Forgiveness for people, forgiveness for yourself, right? How? Because there are other things also that happened in your life, in your family, that you had to I mean, you felt responsible for some things. Why is forgiveness important, and what was the road of forgiving yourself for the harm that confronted, and then forgiving yourself for the harm that you caused?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about me seeking forgiveness from other people for the things that I've done, and that was a very rewarding journey. But I have to say, it was also very, very difficult to forgive myself.
Yeah.
And I still, I still hold a lot of shame for the things that I did. And you know, I had some amazing mentors in my life. Again, people I'd hurt in the past who made a commitment to me to see me through this whole thing. And many years later, they saw the need for me to forgive myself, because I hadn't, even though I was doing amazing work to help other people, and I still at some point had not forgiven myself fully. And they encouraged me to do that, and it was hard because I didn't think I had the authority to tell me that I could forgive myself. Right? Like, I thought that was somebody else needed to tell me that. Like, I still, to some degree, think that. Like, it's not my place to say I'm forgiven, right? Like, other people have to forgive me. And so it was very difficult for me to forgive myself. And I think I have, I struggle with it, but I try and live my life in a way that's positive and that, sets a good framework for other people to follow. Again, I'm not perfect, but I try as much as I can to remind myself that, if I do something that doesn't feel right, it's probably because of something that I've done and how I feel about myself versus some external situation. So forgiving myself was really important. It was especially hard years ago when my younger brother was shot and killed. And he, to some degree, followed in my footsteps. We were 10 years apart. So when I was in the movement, he was a young
Baby.
child,
You do
right?
talk about him, yes.
I was 18 and he was 8, right? So by the time I left when I was 22, he was only 12 years old. But I had a family that I was looking after, and I kind of, to some degree, forgot about my brother. I was there, but I didn't set a great example for him. So when he was a teenager, he started to go down a pretty bad path too. He joined a gang. It wasn't the same type of gang that I was involved in, but he was, involved in gang activity with his friends, and I wasn't there for him. And eventually, he was shot and killed because of who he was. And I was devastated, as my family was devastated after he died. And for years, I blamed myself for that, for not being there for him. So I think that for me was the toughest thing to forgive myself for. But I, eventually came to terms with it and realized that, I didn't kill him. I didn't, contribute to the things that set up that scenario. I did do, I understood, and I had to work hard to understand this. I was there, as much as I could be for him, and that I couldn't blame myself for that. I still feel very guilty about it. I still miss my brother, tremendously. But I've learned to forgive myself, for those things as much as one can. I still feel, sad, completely sad over my whole life, including, what happened to my brother. But, I'm also content in the fact that I know I'm doing everything I possibly can to set a better example, for people these days. And we can only do what we can do.
Yes, it was really heartbreaking because the book is dedicated to him, to Buddy / aka Alex. And the whole time you were talking about him, I'm like, ooh, I don't know where this is going to go. I feel like he's not with us anymore. But I was like, it's like this tense moment throughout the book where I'm like, oh my God, what happened? What? Because you talk about him so, I don't know. It was really, it was hard for me to turn the page when you started talking about him, because I was like, oh my God, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know which direction we're going to take. And yes, the part when you talk about forgiving yourself and taking responsibility, even though you had nothing to do directly with his death, was really something that really, it stuck with me. But again, you're doing the work, you're doing the real work on the ground, right? To get people out. Did anyone from the book reach out to you, even if they were in the movement, after the book or before the book?
Some have. There are certainly some people I knew when I was in the movement who I have since helped.
Okay.
Disengage.
Okay.
But I think even more than that, the book, because it's so widely distributed, I get emails almost every week from people who say, I've read your book or I've seen your TED Talk, and it has inspired me to leave the movement, because I know now that if you can do it, I can do it. And I understand why I hated other people. It's really because I hated myself and all these things. So I know the book has been really instrumental in kind of giving people the courage to get beyond really bad situations. But the book also encourages them not to just leave those movements, but to do, to go back and do better things to repair the harm that they caused. That's kind of like the unwritten rule for me when I work with anybody, or, it's like, you can make your life better, but you also have to go back and make other people's better too. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have written the book and to have published it, and I'm very humbled every time I get a letter or an email or a phone call or a social media message or a text message. They find me somehow.
We will find you. Well, I mean, I just googled former white supremacist, former Nazi. Does anyone out there is part and is not a part of it anymore? And I saw your book, and I immediately messaged you, because I really believe that your book is a must read, regardless of your involvement regardless of one's involvement with the whites. But clearly I have nothing to do with the movement, but it is important to read, because it is not often that you hear someone honestly describe it with the words, with the thinking, and describe the before, the during, the after, and from someone who has no roots in it prior to that. That's the most surprising part, right? Your parents had nothing to do with it. And it's so easy to just, on my end, it's very easy for me to say, what the fuck? I mean, that's stupid, and when you say that it is insecure, man, it's funny, because on my end, we know that. That's why I ask you, like, why do you think they put aside the evil you stood for? Because a lot of people are like, we just know that you're projecting on me something that has everything to do with you. It's not, you don't hate me, you don't know me. First of all, I'm fantastic, but more than that, I have nothing to do with the monster that you created in your.
They don't know that. They've been so conditioned to believe it's somebody else that it's really hard for them to see it themselves. And even when they do realize it, it's hard for them to admit it. But yeah, I mean, I think the book and even my life is relatable to a lot of people, because before I got involved, before I was recruited and preyed upon, I had the same kinds of emotions that I think everybody goes through. And again, it was a skinhead who crossed my path that, pulled me into the movement, but it could have been anybody else. And I think that, for most people, thankfully it is somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I think they can still relate to the feelings of, of searching for identity, community, and purpose, and even dealing with potholes sometimes that are so overwhelming, that they're so heavy to carry, that, we don't really know who to turn to for those things. So I hope people, absolutely, will read it for those reasons. Also for voyeuristic reasons, to understand what life might be like in that movement, but to understand, absolutely, that it's a really human thing to go through as well.
And you know what? Also, for the people who are not involved whatsoever, so for people who are far on the other side, I'm really bad with the left, read it so that, as to not become that movement, because it can be a slippery slope to become the person that you hate, to become the other, it's so easy to blame the extremist and the Nazis. But for me, the more you hate someone, the more you become what you hate. And we must be very careful as to not become that, and therefore has to not lead with violence. And your book is a lesson in humanity, because it really, I remember being in my bed at the end and being like, the answer is really compassion and empathy. It's not think pieces, it's not violence, even though I might feel good if I slap one or two, yes, on the moment, but it's really empathy, and it's really saying to everyone, welcome home, just like that former security guard told you, welcome home. It's really having this perspective of all of these people are away from home on a crusade to save whatever they think they're saving, but when they come back home, to be like, okay, well, you had your fun, I guess, you had your moment, but welcome home and sit down, and I'm here and we can talk. And it's really like, I think it is what will stuck with me and what I will carry with me in every single conversation, which this podcast, I really wanted to talk to a variety of people with a variety of background, and to go to the root of empathy and welcome home, happy that you made it, happy that you find your way back, but no judgment, accountability, but no judgment. And I guess my last question is, are you still making music? Because I feel like you like that part.
Not so much these days. I mean, for many years, until pretty recently, I managed bands and I ran a record label and I was the general manager for a music television show. So music has always been a really important part of my life, for good or for bad. And I love music. I am not making music. My son is making music. He's a really talented musician.
Because it's funny, and that was the thing when you were talking about, because you got involved in the music, your root, your mean of recruiting and propaganda was the music, writing music, and it's like, because I love music, we could see your love for finding the right lyrics. Yes, the right lyrics to hate, but still the right lyrics, the right beat, and you can feel the love for that. And so I hope that it still plays a role, because
it's a very powerful thing in my life. I love music. I notice when I don't have music in my life that I don't feel so great.
Empty.
So I try and include it as much as possible. These days I am still creating. I am, writing television shows and films, and I've got another book that I'm working on right now. Nice. That I'm really excited about. So I am a creator at heart and a creative at heart. So art and music and film and television are my passions. So I will always be involved in it somehow.
Well, thank you for your gift. Thank you for your life. Thank you for what you made of it. Thank you for the books. I will definitely keep an eye on everything that you're putting out, because, like you said, as of just for voyeurism, thank you for everything, honestly. Thank you for everything that you've been through. Kind of sorry, my bad, but also thank you, because this is the impact that you had. I was born the same year a year before your son, so I'm really in that generation, and I wanted to say that, like, truly I see you. I mean, I don't know what it means for you, but like, I see you and understand, and I relate to so much of your book. And it is so important that you do that work, honestly, that you talk about it. And yeah, you are changing this world slowly but surely. So
I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and it's something that I never forget. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do that. And it's been a great conversation, Celine. Thank you very much.
You are doing it fantastically, Mr. Christian Picciolini. Say it right.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Bye.